Hello and welcome everybody back to another attributed session brought to you by us at Dream Data. As usual, I'm Stefan. I'm one of the co-founders of Dream Data. And today I have a guest with me who just said, I ain't Taylor Swift yet. I told her that there's so many people that knows about her by now. But still maybe there's a few people left that we need to tell about who April done for this and what her work is. But the short pitch is here today that we have not Taylor Swift, but April Dunford here to talk about positioning, which is a discipline that I've really come to understand the huge importance of when you do B2B, any kind of go-to-market, but marketing also very particularly. So April, I'm so happy that you want to join us again, talking about all this positioning stuff. And today the discipline is positioning jujitsu, because I think that's where a lot of us end up having to apply positioning work after kind of the theoretical and implementation work I've done. That's when people actually have to put it to work. But before we jump into it, April, could you maybe just spend a few minutes for those who haven't heard about you yet to talk a little bit about your career this far, and then why you've become known as now kind of the queen of positioning nowadays?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks for having me on. This is great. So yeah, my background, I spent 25 years as a repeat vice president of marketing at a series of venture-backed startups. I think in total I did 7. 6 of those were acquired. And so through acquisition, I ended up, working at a bunch of big companies. And about 10 years ago, I can't believe it's been 10 years. 10 years ago, I made the switch to consulting. And now what I do is very, very narrowly focused. So I do positioning work with B2B tech companies. And even more specifically, I do B2B tech companies that have a sales team. So if you have like a zero touch model and nobody ever talks to somebody on the website, I don't work with those. So everybody I work with it tilts towards enterprise software. Sometimes there's hardware in the mix there too. Sometimes it's not purely enterprise, but it's complicated enough that there's a salesperson involved somewhere in the motion for a customer to buy something. And so my clients range in size from little wee startups with a few million revenue to these days I seem to be doing more bigger companies. So really, really big companies that have a thorny positioning problem. And some of those are like hundreds of millions of revenue. Some of those are billions of revenue, like a Google or an IBM kind of thing.
Oh, wow. That's quite large companies. I
Yeah.
guess that's probably also those that maybe somewhere along the way can get a little bit lost because they haven't had to think about being very specific in their positioning as they've just grown and grown and grown.
Well, there's a few things. Like I would say in the bigger companies often bump into a positioning problem for two reasons. One is they've acquired a bunch of things. So usually these big companies, they'll acquire things along the way. That gets thrown into a business unit, and then you have a sales team that has to sell this, new mix of products. And they're a bit like, well, when would I sell this one versus this one? And, why do these things even make sense together? So we're looking at positioning the new stuff in the context of the old stuff, and how does it all fit together? And then the second thing is that markets change, man. Like like you've got a product and you sell it this way against these competitors, and that can work for a really long time, and then something big comes in and disrupts the market. And so sometimes you have a new competitor gets in the market, so the things that were differentiating for you are no longer not quite so differentiating because there's a new competitor in the market. Sometimes what you've got is there's big upheaval, because we were talking earlier about AI. Like throwing AI in the mix of this really upending a lot of markets right now, where there's companies that could never do certain things are now unlocking certain capabilities because you're using AI in the product to do that. It's closing the gap between them and their competitors. And so everybody's been forced to compete a little harder. And there's a lot of repositioning going on right now in these bigger companies where the markets are all of a sudden kind of crowded.
Super interesting. What if we just maybe as a segue to continuously just explain positioning a little bit? What is then what you bucketed as smaller companies, the ones with just a few millions in revenue? Why are they coming to you to seek positioning help?
Well, usually, like in the smaller companies, the positioning is a bit more of an existential thing. Like we got to get it right or we don't get to survive. And most of the time, what you've got in smaller companies is there's just this tremendous competition, like just lots and lots of companies that look like they do exactly the same thing as you. And
Yeah.
so the way you're going to have to stand out and win business is to get really tight on your positioning so that you make it absolutely crystal clear. Why should you pick us versus the 9,000 other things you could do? Because there are 9,000 other things that a customer could do. So getting that really solid foundation on your positioning is the only way that you're going to get really effective marketing and really effective sales stuff going on for any company, but it's particularly crucial when you're, I would say not even just a couple million revenue. Like I'm working with companies this quarter that are 100 million revenue, 200 million revenue, and they've got a dozen competitors, and it is not entirely clear why someone should pick them versus the other things in the market. So, we have to get really, really tight on this if we expect to be able to be effective in what we're doing in marketing and sales across the board.
So there's hopes for all of us, even though we don't know exactly why you should
Hope
buy
for all of us, man.
That's funny. I can also add, as somebody who's been like reading obviously awesome and then trying to follow a bit of what it preaches afterwards, is that it's not only sales and marketing that gains momentum and efficiency from it. It's really been, for us, it's been like a company alignment tool that everybody, okay, this is the direction we are running. These are who we sell to. These are not who we sell to. So let's build product for them. Let's make the CS team focus more on the real ICPs out there.
Yeah, I think it's super important. Like, in the work I do and the way I think about positioning is I really see this as a team effort. Like, the whole point of great positioning is we want to be able to get agreement and alignment across the major functions inside the team. So, we need product, marketing, sales, customer success, the CEO, founders, everybody needs to be singing the same song. Otherwise, we're never going to be able to communicate this effectively out in the market. We're never going to be able to deliver the product and the experience that backs that up. So in my opinion, it's really important to have everybody all in agreement on this stuff.
Yeah, 100% agree. If we change chapters from the introduction of positioning and then move into this very let's call it a sexy B2B marketing word, positioning jujitsu. What made you submit? What made you write that? You released it through Substack, if I'm not mistaken. This article about a positioning jujitsu and how to turn your competitors' strengths into their own weaknesses. Was there any particular experiences you came across that now was the time to summarize this?
Yeah, well, this is a concept that certain of my clients, we get into this conversation because they'll say, well, the competitor has this thing and there's just no way to compete against it because obviously customers want this and we can't do that. And say, oh, well, actually, everything that looks like a strength, there's a flip side of it. I could look at it and say that it's a weakness. And so the first time I really thought about this is early in my career. I worked for this company and we thought we competed against IBM. It turned out we did not, but we had this idea that we did. And when we got in and we were pitching the thing that we did, we always talked about simplicity, ease of use, how easy it was to get somebody trained on our tool, time to value, all that kind of stuff. Like the thing was just so elegant, so clean. And we would go in and talk about that. And we would make fun of IBM because they had a thing. And in particular, we had a specific feature we used to make fun of, and it was a drop-down menu. And we click on this drop-down menu, and there were so many options you had to scroll. And so you click on this thing and go, look at this bull crap right here. This is terrible. Like, can you imagine? You got a user has got to figure out what these 29 things do, And so we would pop this drop-down list and scroll. We had a little GIF. Right. And we'd say, isn't that terrible? You don't want that. You want this. Right. And ours is like, you got to do a thing. Clickety, click, click, click. We get it done. And then, so we used to always talk about this. We're like, obviously people want this. Obviously nobody wants this, scroll thing. Well, then I end up going to work at IBM. And I'm literally in a customer meeting with a customer, and the sales rep clicks on that same drop-down menu, and he's sitting across from a CIO at a great big bank, and he says, "Look at this." And I'm like, "What's the customer going to say?" And the customer says, "That's amazing. So all of that is built into the product?" He says, "Yeah, look at that. Any use case, any option, anything you want. Look at the flexibility on this thing." And the CIO at this giant company loved that.
Yeah.
And so that cracked my brain a little bit. And the reason it was different is because we were selling a completely different kind of customer. So we were selling to a customer that didn't want that flexibility. What they really cared about was ease of use. What they really cared about was how hard was it to get somebody on board or whatever. But this CIO of this giant company was thinking about, well, I got this department, that department, this department, that department. And they got all different requirements. And if the product doesn't do it, I'm going to have to do it with professional services. That's going to cost me a fortune, blah, blah, blah. Different customers, different requirements. This thing that we thought was their big Achilles heel, weakness, turned out is actually their strength. And the thing that we thought was a strength was the reason we could never sell into those big accounts. So that got me thinking about, well, wow, like that's probably true of a lot of things, like not just this concept of ease of use versus whatever else. And so once you start being on the lookout for that, you start seeing all these places where this thing that looks like an obvious strength, you know, for a certain kind of customer, it isn't a strength at all. It's actually a weakness.
That's so interesting. And it has so many consequences of what you're saying here, because why were people even in that sales meeting if the customer wanted that a long stroll, and why had you not attracted somebody else, or why haven't you been outbounding to teams who weren't looking for that feature?
Well, I mean, this is the thing. Like, it was inherent in the segment of the company that we were trying to focus on. So, if I'm thinking about how to use this in practice, right? Like the most common one that I get with my clients when we're talking about positioning is they'll say, "Well, we got a big incumbent in the space. So we got a leader in the space, and they're the safe choice." They're the safe choice. And not only are they the safe choice because everybody's picked them and they're the leader in the space, but they do all the things. They have all the features, you know, again, that scrolling thing. Like they have everything, absolutely everything, and we can't match it. And so we go in and we talk to a client and they say, "Well, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this?" And we say, "No, no, no." And then we lose the deal. How are we ever supposed to compete against them? We're a little startup. We look risky. They got all the stuff. And then not only that, they've got like this thing where they just look really safe, right? Like they have so many customer references. They have so many whatever. So this is kind of like if you're going to buy a CRM, this is why people pick Salesforce. They're the leader in the market. They're the safe choice. They're not risky at all. They do all the things, literally all the things. And so how would anybody ever sell against that? And yet there are tons of companies that sell against that, and they sell against it by turning that strength into weakness. So, so I worked at a company where we sold against a big incumbent, and we did it by focusing on an underserved subsegment of the market. So one of the big weaknesses that comes with being the market leader is you're trying to be everything to everyone. And you have to be in order to, you know, maintain this market share in this giant market, which means that you're exposed in lots of markets that aren't that big, but well, more than big enough to support a mid-sized startup or a bigger startup. And then once that startup grows to a point where they're number 2 in the market, they can start to challenge number 1. So you'll get this thing where, so the example I used, I think in that post was Velocity, which was this company that focused specifically on financial services and then came in, grew to 100 million, working in this subsegment that Salesforce wasn't doing a very good job of competing against. And then eventually Salesforce bought them for a spectacular amount of money. So it didn't hold them back on the growth at all. And in fact, they even built on the Salesforce platform. And so there's lots of examples of this, I think, where you can, you know, take the thing that looks like, you know, it's untouchable, and use it to your advantage. Here's the other one you have when you have the big, gorilla in the market. Often the gorilla in the market is really slow to adopt new technology because their platform is complicated. It's big. It's a lot of lines of code, man. And it does all the things for all this stuff. And there's all kinds of APIs and other things they have to consider. And so it's not easy to just come in and adopt some new thing and have that work. That smaller companies can often crank out new innovation really fast. And if you're aimed at a subsegment of the market that really needs that innovation or really cares about that innovation, you can often position the leader in the market as kind of the old legacy junk and position yourself as the new hotness. Now, if you happen to be the leader, like let's say I'm Salesforce, I got to be careful about that. So if I'm Salesforce in the market, and if you look at those folks, they're doing a spectacular job with this AI stuff, at least from what I can see. But they have to, right? If they don't, then number 2, number 3 in the market is going to look at them and say, all right, we're going to be the CRM for people that want the AI stuff. And so we're going to do all this AI stuff. We're going to use that to close the gap between where we are with them. So they have to run hard. But if you look at other markets, like, do you think SAP is doing a great job here? Do you think Oracle's doing a great job here?
They look a bit boring from the outside.
Right. Not necessarily. Right. So if Oracle was my competitor, I could absolutely position them as a dinosaur, old legacy crap.
Yeah.
And I'm the hot new thing. And look at all this cool stuff I'm doing. And look at all this, I've got all this stuff. And those guys aren't going to get that for 3 years because that's how stupid and old and slow they are.
Yeah.
So that's the other way you can compete against the entrenched, big, safe competitor that does everything. Is one, you find your little spot in the market that they're not serving very well, and you go run at that, and then you expand out from there. Or 2, you figure out a way to out innovate them and position them as yesterday's news.
Yeah, I'm thinking there must be so many different ways to kind of find ways to eat into the market, whether it could be like geo, even like, is there a language they don't serve? So, and you're strong in, let's say, German, and they don't do German, then start there, build a position, and then once you're stronger and have more muscle, you can start eating into more languages, to do like a simple example.
That's it. Like, the thing you got to be careful about is, one, your beachhead market has to be big enough to support the business. So, if your revenue goal for this year is 2 million.
That's a good expression, the beachhead market.
Well, that's what it is. Like the place where you're going to land, it's got to be big enough that, like, if you say, okay, this year I got to make 2 million revenue, and in order to do 2 million revenue, I got to close 100 deals. And you look at that market and there's only 100 companies, well, you're not going to make it.
No, absolutely not.
So you got to look at that thing and say, okay, beachhead market has to be big enough to meet my short-term revenue goals. Otherwise, it's a non-starter.
That makes sense.
And then, but most of the time, especially in these huge markets, like CRM is a great example. Like the market is so massive that there are massive beachhead markets that are completely underserved by the market leader. That you could come in there and, and there's lots of examples of people building 100 million revenue companies in a few years going after subsegments of that market. So that's the first one. Then the second thing you've got to worry about when you're doing this strategy is after you've got the beachhead, you got to have a plan for what comes next. So, I use this example all the time of a company I worked at where we were selling enterprise CRM. We focused down on CRM for investment banks because that's where we could really win. We had a key feature there. We could deliver value there that the market leader couldn't. But we were never planning on just staying in investment banking. Like the strategy was, we're going to do banking, investment banking, then we were going to go to retail banking, then we're going to go to insurance. And each step made it easier for us to get to the next step. It was easier to get to retail banking once we had investment banking because we had proven that we knew banking. And then once we get banking, then we could go to insurance because we're financial services people. And so there should be a strategy that helps you expand the market over time, and you're not just going to be this small thing that you start out as.
Maybe just to take a little sidetrack here, then I'm thinking about the kind of how much is it possible to kind of rewind, or like, let's say you made a wrong positioning step because you became too broad or you went for too much. How do you backtrack from taking kind of a too broad a step or too long a step from where you are today?
Well, I've worked at a couple of companies where we had to do an adjustment,
Yeah,
and the one I just mentioned, we started out being way too broadly
yeah,
focused. Like we were so broadly focused we couldn't grow. So, we had one customer in insurance and one customer was a telco and another customer that was, I forget what those guys were doing. We had 6 customers and they were all completely different.
right,
And so what were we? Well, we were just a thing for enterprises.
yeah,
And so we couldn't get any traction with that.
yeah,
So it's not that hard to narrow down. It's harder to expand, frankly, and do it successfully where you actually get any traction. When you go to narrow down, what you're looking for is, what is the value that I can deliver or my product can deliver that no one else can? And then you need to really sit with, well, what are the characteristics of a target account that really care about that value? So a lot of the companies that I work with, we end up narrowing down the focused area because the company is too broadly focused and they're wasting a lot of resources in marketing and sales chasing deals that they're just never going to get.
yeah,
And so I'm thinking about one in particular. It was a company that was making it really easy to pay contractors. And they had a lot of value around how to do that at scale. So if you
yeah,
had a large number of contractors, the companies that they worked with used to spend days and days and days at the end of the month getting everybody paid. And with this tool, you could get it done super fast, 0 errors. Everybody gets paid on time. Contractors really happy. So when we looked at it and we looked at the accounts they were targeting, like lots of those accounts had contractors, but not a lot of them had a lot of contractors. And so then we had this conversation around, well, who's got a lot of contractors? Like a lot.
yeah,
And so there were things like, I remember one of the targets we focused in on was engineering consultants, where they had a lot of contractors. They're quite highly paid and had a lot of optionality. So if they didn't work for them, they could boost out and work for someone else. And getting them paid on time was really, really important. And so one of the areas they decided to focus on was that. And then they just went and sold the heck out of that for a year and made all kinds of money and had the revenue going like this. And then they started picking off the next ones after that.
The thing is that, like, once you get narrow, all the other decisions become so much easier, because
So
then
much
instead of
easier.
100 conferences, it's only 10 conferences.
So true.
If it's this ad, or if you start having like very weak copywriting because you're not really talking to anybody, once it's very narrow, you can be very like, you're an engineer at a company of this size in this industry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then suddenly the engagement of your advertising becomes a lot better as well.
That's exactly it. Like all your marketing ROI just goes way through the roof because you can get super, super focused on this stuff.
Yeah.
Like the company I was talking about where we decided to focus in on investment banks, like not only that, like we actually had a glossary and we would train our sales reps on a bunch of investment banking terms so they could go in and have a conversation with investment banker and not sound like an idiot. So they were going in talking about, Chinese walls and all this stuff, whereas our big competitor would come in and they would literally do like a call center demo for an investment banker, which is like nothing. That is not at all how investment banker works. And so they looked like they just didn't get that market at all. Whereas we could get really narrow and come in, do a demo that was highly targeted right at the work stream of that particular individual. We used all their terminology. All our demo data looked like investment banking data. Like we just came in there looking way smarter than the other folks. And then same thing with our marketing. Like, we narrowed down to like a target list of customers that was 2,000 accounts.
Yeah.
And we were like, that's all we have to focus on are these 2,000 accounts. Like everything is just so much easier.
That's funny. Like that's probably a good piece of writing for you to do at some point. Just the vocabulary training per industry to make sure that the positioning resonates. I think we've had examples of where we've been dealing with people who regarded themselves as in the banking industry, and then our AEs would have used the term fintech, and then those in the banking industry would be very offended because they are not a fintech, they're in banking. And if you get these small nuances wrong, then people just call you a bluff and say you don't know about our industry
They don't
because
know
you
about our
haven't
stuff.
understood it.
Like, and you got to be careful with this, because sometimes it really, really matters, and sometimes it doesn't matter all that much. So you got to sort of decide, like, how much does this matter? Now, in the case of investment banking for something, a concept like Chinese wall is super important because it's talking about security and compliance about where information gets shared. And that's where and so if you didn't know, if somebody mentioned a Chinese wall and you didn't know what that was very scary for an investment banker, because they're like, if this thing doesn't, comply with this separation between the research group and the investment banking group, then we're all going to go to jail. So it's okay sometimes if you don't get the terminology quite right on some of the minor stuff, but there's some of the big stuff that you at least need to understand that concept, because you're not getting a deal doing CRM with an investment bank if you don't understand that there's this division of information and it can't cross this wall thing.
Makes a lot of sense. April, if we look towards picking who you do jujitsu with or against, I know it's part of some of the books as well, like trying to figure out who to actually pick, who you're actually fighting with and who you're not fighting with. Can you share a few thoughts about who should people actually care about doing the jiu-jitsu fight with, and who should they just not think about?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I found most surprising when I started doing this work, as a consultant versus in-house. Like, so when I was in-house and as vice president, we do a positioning exercise. And I felt like in the companies I worked at, we always had a pretty good handle on who our competition was and who it wasn't. But I have been very surprised as a consultant going out that if I get a cross-functional team together and I've got marketing, product, and sales together in the room, and I say, okay, if your stuff didn't exist, what would a customer do? And you would be surprised how different parts of the organization have very different ideas about who that competition is. And so we have to be very careful that if we are positioning ourselves against a competitor, we need to be positioning ourselves against the actual alternative that the customer has in their mind. So what we often get in tech is, if I Googled it, I can find a long, long list of competitors that actually look a lot like me. I can pull out the Gartner Quadrant or the Lumascape, or I can go on G2 Crowd or whatever and look at that thing and say, oh my gosh, there's 25 companies in here. I got a position against all of these. How do I do that? But then you walk over and you talk to your sales team. And again, everybody I work with has a sales team. If you go and walk over to the sales team and you say, do we ever see these guys in a deal? No. And so it's, well, why do I have to position against them then? Like, they're a ghost as far as my customer is concerned. So I don't have to worry about positioning against things that I think should compete with me. Like at the beginning of this, when I was talking about, I worked at this company and we thought we competed with IBM, and then it turned out we didn't. Like, we were idiots. If we had just talked to sales would have said, dudes, we never see them in a deal. But their product looked just like ours. They said the same thing as us. We kind of had this idea, like, if we're not competing with them now, we're gonna. But the future never happened where we competed against them. And so I think that's one thing that you got to be careful on this. Like, if you're doing competitive positioning, you need to really position against who's causing you pain, which means, like, do we lose deals to these folks? Are these folks making it to the later stage of a deal? And if they're not, we don't have to worry about them.
Yeah.
Now, then, and then what you'll get is your product management team. They'll say, trust me, they will, April. They're coming. They're coming for us. I've been reading their stuff and, following them around and fully smoking their marketing. and they're going to get us like next year. And the answer to that is, okay, man, if they do come to get us next year, then we're going to adjust the positioning to account for that next year.
And
But
then
for a lot of these folks, they never show up. They look like they should, but they never do. So we have to stay in our positioning very oriented around why pick us versus the other guys. And the other guys are in the minds of customers, not who we think should compete with us or who could compete with us, but who actually does. Who ends up on a short list? Who does a customer list? Who causes us pain? Who do we actually lose deals to? And then we're going to jujitsu against them.
And then even in that case, the status quo might be what you're competing against in the mini deals as well.
Like, it's the worst competitor we've got is that, right? The worst competitor we've got is no decision, right? And no decision is either the thing we've got right now works good enough and it's just not worth the hassle and the expense and the pain of change to go to something else.
Yeah. You didn't manage to lift the
or
position.
it's no decision because we're kind of worried if we go to something else, that sounds kind of scary. And what if it fails? And what if it doesn't do the thing that people say it's going to do? And that, so we have to work hard against that. We have to work really hard against that.
Yeah. So I guess then once you've picked the right competitor, then what is the practical application in a positioning jiu-jitsu match here? Then what is it that we need to observe in the market we then stare at being us versus them and in this match?
Well, okay. So one of the things you got to do is you got to look at that competitor the way a customer is going to look at them. And then you got to figure out, well, could I shift that perspective? So let me give you another example. The other one that comes up a lot is the platform versus single tool thing. So, let's say we're the platform, or let's say we're the tool and we're competing against someone that's got a platform. So there's this platform. Now, first of all, lots of companies say they have a platform, but it is not actually a platform. So, but we use this word very loosely in tech. In tech, we think it means something, but for customers, so when we say platform in tech, usually what we mean is there's a bunch of modules or individual products, and they all play nicely together. And there's integration between them. And ideally, there's shared metadata between them. So like if I log in over here, it automatically logs me in here. Or if I do something in this module knows about it, so there's like some kind of metadata later, some kind of something, and so there's value in having these things all together.
We definitely got that platform word wrong in the beginning. I have to admit.
Well, so it actually doesn't matter, because when you say platform to a customer, they don't always think that. Like sometimes what they think is, oh, I'm buying these 3 products and it all comes from the same vendor. And that's nice. And I expect them to kind of play nice together, but shared metadata, I don't even know what that is. Maybe you have that, maybe you don't. And so that's the first thing. So I've got several examples of companies that I work with, and they said, well, we're selling this tool, but we're against these guys and they sell a platform. And so it does all these things and we just do the one thing. How are we going to beat them? And the answer is, well, let's look at the platform. First of all, often the platform is not actually a platform. Often it's just a bunch of tools owned by the same company, and there is no integration between the tools. So picking your thing as tool number 2 is exactly the same as picking their tool number 2. All you got to do is educate the customer that is true, if it's true. Right? Second thing is, in the platform, often the individual piece parts aren't all that great. Or there's some of the piece parts that are really bad. Really bad.
Because they've been busy building all these broadly applicable features.
Exactly. They're building all those things. Where you come as the specialist tool vendor. Now, if you're selling to a customer that, they need all these things, but the thing they really need is this thing, and you sell that thing, then you sell on that. You come in and say, you know what? Use their stuff for the rest of it. That's fine. But this, dude, you're giving up all this stuff by going for the generic half-assed version of it over here in the platform versus my specialized tool. And so the platform has the advantage of one vendor, right? One piece of paper to sign. If something goes wrong, you call one company, one throat to choke is how we talk about this at IBM. So, one company and all that sort of stuff. If you're the tools vendor, you got to sell on the value that you're going to get working with a specialist vendor, a specialist tool. Like he can do a whole bunch of things that this thing can't. The other thing you've got is that same thing you had with the, market leader versus the specialist. Like you've got this focus that the other guys don't. And so, if you haven't got a bunch of value you can deliver because of that, it would be weird. Like for sure you do. And so there's that. And then now let's play it the other way. Let's say I'm the vendor of the platform and I'm trying to position against a very strong individual tool. Well, what I'm trying to the strengths I've got is, look, if you buy that tool, they got some extra stuff that we don't have for sure. Yeah. But you're going to have to figure out how to make that thing play nice with the 15 other tools you have around it. This has all been done for you. We've already done it. Hopefully that's true. You can't say it unless it's true. But if it's true, you should talk about it. It's already been done. And you can also talk about if you actually are a platform and you have shared metadata, then you can talk about, well, this is how all these things all play nice together. And you are never going to get that from stitching together that standalone tool with these other things. This is, Salesforce, for example, sells you the CRM, Sales Cloud, and then they come in and they say, well, you should buy our marketing automation platform. Not because it's the greatest marketing automation platform in the world. I think we kind of admit that it's not. However, it is the greatest marketing automation platform if you already have Salesforce because of all this nice integration.
That makes a lot of sense. Are there any kind of general tips for how to pick the contrasting things, kind of your strength versus their weakness, or your weakness versus their strengths?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, you got to know what you're good at. So, for example, if you're the individual tool vendor and you're good at a very specific set of things where none of the other folks can touch you, particularly the platform vendor you're trying to position against, what you really want to think about is what's the value that a customer gets out of that? And importantly, who cares the most about that value? Can you target accounts where that value really, really, really makes a difference? Same thing the other way. Like if I'm the platform vendor and I'm trying to sell against a tool, and if I say, well, it's integration and it's these things working together and whatever, then I should be thinking about, well, who cares a lot about that? And there's probably accounts that have way more complexity in this stuff than others, where you having a thing that's already pre-integrated and working nice together is much more valuable than it is for another account. So you need to really, really focus in on what's my differentiated capability, what's the value that can drive, and then what's the segment of the market that really cares about that, so we can go in with this message that says, hey, you want to pick us because of this. And that customer is going to go, you know what, that's really important to us. So we pick you over the other dudes.
And that goes all the way out into the first ads they see about you, the first impressions they have at your conference, and then all the sales conversations afterwards.
That's right. You're hooking them with that. You're running that into everything that you do.
April, is there a difference if, sometimes there's always somebody who gets the first sales call with the customer versus the competition that gets the second call, or sometimes you're late to the party and then you have to do the jujitsu afterwards.
Yeah.
Are there any kind of timing things here to be aware of, which kind of how you perceive with the battle?
Well, here's the thing. The vast majority of companies do a lousy job of positioning their competitors. This is almost universally true. And so if you can get in there, particularly if you're the first call, like if you're the first call and you can effectively paint a picture of the market and say, those guys fit over there, and these folks fit over there, and these folks fit over there, and you want to pick us because of this, then guaranteed Your competitors are not going to talk about that. Your competitors are going to say, here's a thing we do, here's another 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 thing to do. But I've given you a mental model to think about the whole market. And if you can effectively do that, you can run circles around the other guys. It's harder to do, obviously, if you're the second call.
Yeah.
But if the folks on the first call failed to position you, didn't give you a little opening there.
So
you can come in the second call and educate them. Now, not everybody's open to education, but in enterprise software, where this is a long deal, it's going to take you a while to get this deal closed anyways, and you're on the short list, like, you have the opportunity to go in and say, yes, listen, you have lots of options. We're not the only one, but we specialize in this, and we're really good at that. Now, there's other options you could take. You could pick what's called you'll hear these companies and they'll call themselves a platform. But when you look at it, they actually grew by acquisition, and these three piece parts don't actually integrate with each other. They'll call it a platform when they come in and pitch you, but ask them these three questions. Ask them, if you log in here, does it log you in the other one? Ask them, if you do this over here, does the other thing know that you've done it? So if those things are actually separate products, then you should be buying best of breed separate products.
That's so good. You've played this game many times, April.
So you can educate a customer, especially if your competitor is stretching the truth a little bit. Like, it's the greatest gift ever if the competitor stretches the truth, because you can come in and say, hey, other guys out there will say this, but what they mean is this. And if they're on your short list, here's three things you should ask them.
Yeah.
Customers freaking love that. By the way, when you have the guts to go in, and that's not bashing the competitors, you don't even have to say them by name. You can put them all in a bucket and say.
I was just sitting and thinking, are you a namer of competition when you do the competitive market, or are you proposing people not name it? Say you're first to the deal. Should you lay out the brands, or should you not lay out the specific brands?
In general, I don't think you need to, right? Because in general, I think your posture should be, we are not competing with individual companies. We are competing with approaches to the problem. And you will say, some vendors approach it this way, and other vendors approach it this way. We approach it this way. And here's the pros and cons of each approach. And then if a customer mentions somebody and says, oh, well, we're talking to so-and-so, we say, yeah, they go in that bucket.
That's
but what I don't want to do is list vendors that I'm not sure the company has looked at. So if the customer hasn't necessarily looked at them, now you've introduced this, hey, you didn't do your homework, and often you'll delay a deal because the customer will be like, ooh, hang on, now I got to go back into research mode because you said something and I never heard of those guys before, and now I feel stupid. So I generally try not to do that. What you're trying to do is get the customer comfortable that they understand their options and the pros and cons of their options. So if I'm not talking about individual companies, if I'm talking about approaches, then I can put anybody in the approach. And then if a new name comes up, you say, yeah, they're just like those guys. They just go in this bucket. Yeah. Don't worry. You got it, right? You've done enough research. You know how this works.
Yeah, and you still, as an AE, you still demonstrate you understand the market and what are the needs and features.
That's right. Like, in a good AE will ask the question, are you looking at anybody else? And who are you looking at? And most of the time the customer will give it up because they want to know what your opinion of those guys are.
Absolutely.
Right? And so it's not bashing. Like, you're doing it wrong if you come in and you say, these guys suck and they're terrible at everything, right? That's not what this is. You come in and you say, they're good for this, but not for this. So if you care about these three things, you should pick us. But if you don't care about those three things, you should pick them. They're fine too. I mean, they're in the market. They're doing well. You'd be dumb to trash them. Here's the other thing. If there's a gorilla in the market, so let's say,
someone big.
Let's say we're an enterprise. We're selling to an enterprise company and we're selling CRM. Like, I think you can name Salesforce. You're probably pretty safe there because, of course the customer is looking at that. But anybody else, I wouldn't name it until the customer does. And then I would teach them what bucket they go in. But sometimes we do name the elephant in the room if it truly is the elephant in the room.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, time is flying fast. I was just
There's a
thinking,
lot of questions in the thing. I don't know. Do we want to take
as
them?
a heavy engagement, April, it's always like that when when you're involved, but that's great.
I don't know. They
Um,
might all be disagreeing with me. I don't know. I haven't been following it.
Maybe
Hello,
we can just
in
do
the
a
chat.
little timely stab on the. I think everybody or a lot of companies right now are like, we jumped early on the AI wagon in our feature set, or we haven't jumped on it yet because we think AI is going to mature a little bit more and it's smarter for us to wait 3, 6, 12
Mm,
months before we actually start applying AI in our industry. How do you think, like, let's say you are facing a competitor, or I guess there's two cases. There's either you chose to wait 6 months because you think AI is going to be like the models are getting rapidly better every month, and then the opposite is you jumped on it very early and the competitor
yeah,
has not jumped on AI. I know it's a super timely question, but
I
what's your
know.
versus that inside of that to AI or not to AI just right now?
Yeah. So here's the thing. Like again, we have to really put our customer hat on for this stuff and think about this the way a customer would think about it. So AI and the capabilities that a company can unlock with AI inside their own product is obviously super exciting and important. And most companies that I know are at least looking at it. Most of the companies that I work have some kind of AI capability in the product right now. But there's a few things to think about. So one is um, you may have some really interesting capabilities that you have unlocked by adding AI to your product. That doesn't necessarily mean that AI now becomes one of your headline things that you talk about. Like at the end of the day, most customers still care more about the value that you deliver versus how you got it done. So you may mention that you did it with AI, but the main thing to focus on is the so what for the customer. Like, so what does this mean for the customer's business? What can this unlock that it couldn't? How is this going to help you make money? How is this going to help you save money? Like, that's the key thing. And so now the exception to this, which is really important, is at this particular junction, everyone is so excited about AI, including a lot of big businesses that you might be selling to, so excited that you may have the situation where the company comes and says, look, we got an AI initiative going here and I ain't buying anything that doesn't fit into my AI initiative, so you better come in here and tell me about the AI, man. And so if you're hearing that from your customers, then you're going to be all AI first. You're going to talk about the AI stuff. You're going to whatever. And you're going to be, oh, yes, we fit in that bucket. No problem. Because your customer is telling you that's a requirement. But I think in the companies I've worked with, and we've had lots of conversations about this, in the majority, we're not seeing that with customers. You have to check in with your customers and see
Yeah,
if that's true.
absolutely.
But in the majority, we're not seeing that with customers. Customers are still buying, they want to understand how it works. And a lot of them are really interested in AI. So they're interested in here's the value. And they'll say, well, how do you do that? And you'll say, oh, we do this with AI and here's how it works. Sometimes they're interested in how you do it because they're worried that there's maybe something risky in the way the AI stuff works because, you're selling to a bigger account. Not all these bigger accounts are allowed to use some of this Gen AI stuff because of
Yeah,
privacy.
it could be counterproductive as well if
Privacy.
you're
That's
buying.
right. So but you have to be prepared to talk about it. But
Yeah.
again, it's not the lead. The lead is, we can do this and that delivers this value. And then we talk about how we do it. And then how we do it, we can talk about the AI stuff in there. The only
Uh,
exception is that if I get so sometimes you will get a customer, and this happened when, we've seen this in other big changes in tech. But sometimes you'll get a customer that says, look, we have an initiative, it's AI. I have to prove to my boss that everything I'm doing has a whole bunch of AI and fits into our AI strategy. And then you say, great, here's how we do it. and then you'll do that. But for the majority of cases that I've seen, the customer still cares about what's in it for me. And they're intellectually curious about what people are doing with AI. But at the end of the day, they still got to make the justification to their boss, why buy this thing? And that's how we're going to make some more money. How are we going to save some money? And
There's
that's it.
scope for rationality out there still.
Yeah. Like one thing I would be very careful of
I've just
is,
seen too many websites that just kind of from one day to another plotted in AI 10 times on their front page.
yes. And here's the thing, like a lot of that is going to fail.
Yeah.
And so you don't necessarily want to follow your competitor over the cliff on that one.
Very
Because
true.
what I'm seeing now is a lot of companies will say, well, I don't know, man, our main competitor just changed their whole website to say, they used to be, whatever for mid-sized manufacturers, and now they're AI for mid-sized manufacturers. It's like, but they're still in the accounting business.
Yeah.
People are still buying them to do accounting functionality. So, so you can talk about innovation, and I think that's legitimate, particularly if you're competing against a legacy player, for example. You might want to talk about how we're being more innovative, and one of your proof points on that innovation might be the cool stuff you're doing with AI, for example. But at the end of the day, the customer's like, I'm going to give you this money. What am I getting in return? And that's business value.
Absolutely.
And so you got to be able to talk to that. Yeah.
Sweet. Okay, coming to the end here, April. End of the
So
jiu-jitsu.
fast. Why does it go so fast?
It's so great. So let's say the jiu-jitsu match is over, or let's use that image. When do you know that you kind of have settled for a good positioning way to fight versus a bad way to fight? Or when do you kind of do the score of having done the positioning exercise, tried it out, and what are the signs that put you in the good bucket, this is working, or the wrong bucket, sorry, this is not working?
Like it's tricky, right? Because positioning impacts you all the way across the entire pipeline, right? Like it impacts you in the early stages in terms of whether or not your content is resonating with people, the right kind of customers, and getting them, introduced to you and knowing about you. And so then it also impacts, what lead generation works or doesn't. It impacts what's happening in sales. It impacts whether or not you close deals or whether you're closing the right deals. If you're closing the wrong deals, and that impacts churn. So like it's all the way across. And so how do you know when it's working or not working? Because there's lots of other things that can be busted in this that can, make the pipeline look terrible.
Sure.
And it's not always just positioning. But so in the work that I do with companies, everybody that I'm working with is in market. They have a product, they're selling it now, and they have a sales team. So we'll work on the positioning with a cross-functional team of the smartest minds inside the company, and we'll work on getting a really tight answer for why pick us versus the other guys. And then we'll look at putting that into a sales pitch, and then we're going to test it in sales conversation. So the reason I like testing it in sales conversations is a bunch of things. Like one is we get a lot of signal in a sales conversation that we don't necessarily get if I'm just A/B testing some language on a landing page, right? If I'm sitting across from a customer, first thing is I can control for who I'm talking to. Maybe testing a landing page and I'm driving the wrong traffic to that landing page and it fails or doesn't fail. Who cares? Like I haven't learned anything. By maybe testing a landing page, I'm not just testing positioning. I'm testing writing and the layout of the landing page and where the freaking buttons are and all the rest of that stuff. Whereas if I'm having a conversation with a qualified prospect, I know exactly who they are. I know that they fit my ICP. I know that they should love my stuff. So I'm controlling for a lot of things. And then I can take this positioning, put it in a sales pitch. And the great thing about that is it's not the same as like copy, right? I got half an hour, maybe an hour with a client. So if I explain it this way and it doesn't quite land, I can give them an example and I can run it around and I can see, is the customer are they getting it or are they not? And then I can also look at, well, what sort of questions do they ask? Do they say, oh yeah, I get what you are, but you're just like Salesforce and you're not even in that market? Well, that's a miss. Or if they come in and they're getting really excited about stuff, then you can tell that something's working. Like you can tell by the questions they're asking, right? And you can tell by the objections that come up in that conversation. So you get so much more signal out of doing a live conversation with a qualified prospect than you ever could trying to do this hands off in a, landing page thing or whatever. So I usually recommend as a first test, we do the positioning, we translate it into a sales pitch, and then let's just run it by a bunch of qualified prospects and see how it lands. And if it starts landing good and we think, okay, this is good, but really the comparison is, if I've got a really experienced sales rep doing these pitches, I can ask the sales rep, is this better than the old pitch? And your rep will know. And so that's the pass fail. It's easy. And
Yeah,
they say, okay,
depends on it.
yeah, like if the rep says, yeah, no, this is way better than the old pitch. Okay, now we're past. Now we can take that, turn it into messaging, and now we've got the work to do to what should the messaging be, in campaigns and the homepage and emails, all that kind of stuff, and we can go build a messaging document. But so that's how I like to do it. It's like you test it on real customers and see whether it lands. Because if it doesn't land there, like let's kill this now and not go and blow our brains out doing messaging and everything else on positioning that doesn't necessarily work.
There's 2 books you can buy if you need to get started here. You can either do the obviously awesome for the positioning and all the strategy, or if you got the strategy, you buy the sales pitch book, both of them that you wrote, April.
Yeah. Well, this is why I after I wrote the first book, I said I wasn't writing any more books. But then I had so many conversations with companies about how to translate positioning into a sales pitch in an effective way. And it was clear to me that there wasn't kind of a standard way of building a sales pitch. So I thought, well, I got one of those. I could teach people that. So I wrote the second book for that. So if you're struggling with how do we take the positioning and translate it into a sales pitch that actually does a good job of painting this picture of the competitive landscape and saying, there's different approaches to the problem, and we do this and they do that, then that's the second book.
Fantastic. April, we're out of time. If people can't get enough of you, what path do you want to
they can't get enough of you. Yeah. So I'm taking a little marketing hiatus at the moment. Just because I'm really, really busy with client work. But there's lots of stuff. So the 2 books are usually the best place to start. And I would start with obviously Awesome, which is the book on positioning. That's kind of everything I know about positioning in a book format. If you know that stuff, the basics, and you want to go deep on this stuff, I got a podcast. It's called Positioning with April Dunford. And so a lot of that is just me doing a deep dive on a particular aspect of positioning. And then I got a newsletter every once in a while. I write something on the newsletter, which is on the Substack. So it's if you go to aprildunford.com, you can see a link to the newsletter and the podcast. And yeah. And then sometimes I post stuff on social media, but not lately. I'm taking a little break.
Yeah. Much demand.
maybe I ramp it back up next month.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, April. It's been fantastically educating for myself, and I can see on the activity in the comment field as well. It's been great. If you like the conversation with April, do also go in and subscribe to Attributed where you listen to podcasts, because then you will get the next conversation with go-to-market specialists just like April. And one day we might become as famous as Taylor Swift if we all do our jobs really well.
Nobody is ever going to be as famous as Taylor Swift. I think we just got to admit defeat on that. She's just going to beat all of us.
That might be true. April, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Okay, thanks so much for having me, and thanks